So about a day and a half ago or so, we got some notes from Blizzard on updates and changes they are making to the new dungeon pool for Season 2. For context, the season's not out yet. It is the first week of the new patch 11.1, but the new season isn't coming out till next week. So they did push some updates to both the PTR as well as live servers now that have actually changed some of the trash mobs in a handful of dungeons. So in this video, I just want to kind of go through what those changes are and kind of point out some improvements. So starting off, Theater of Pain. So in Theater of Pain, what they've done is when you go into Zav the Unfallen's wing, the Halls of Might, there are 3 or I guess 6 mini bosses. And these mini bosses were relatively annoying only because depending on which one would spawn, it would be vastly different in terms of difficulty. Some of them, all the mechanics were avoidable. Some, it was constantly unavoidable mechanics, and being primarily like single target as well as having some weird cheesy line of sight stuff that you can do. Basically, this wing was kind of up to chance. Now, of course, there's the whole conspiracy theory where you can control which mini bosses spawn. But basically, regardless, in some senses, there were mini bosses that were very easy and very hard. What they've done is they've redistributed the abilities, and it somewhat homogenized the mini bosses. It didn't like completely homogenize them where it doesn't matter which one spawns, but basically they've removed like the whirlwind on one and put it on another. They took ricocheting blade and moved it to another. But basically they made it so there's an equal amount of movement and equal amount of damage, or at least they tried to across all the mini bosses. So I jumped on PTR last night and I did a little bit of testing. I only did one run, but the 3 mini bosses that we saw, including Kthara, Heaven, and I forgot the last one. Basically, the first guy who normally used to have like the whirlwind didn't, and the one who had the frontal no longer had that, but he had the whirlwind on the ground, so we had to get out of that. So it slightly changes how you're going to tank them, but I think overall this is a good change. One other thing that they did is they made Koltharok actually start at 50 energy. This is so much better because the cadence of the fight was really strange. You would pull the boss and he wouldn't really do anything for a while, and it was made for a fairly boring boss fight, but then all of a sudden you get this massive ramp in difficulty right in the middle. And so what this does is it actually makes the cadence a little bit better. So while it was, you could argue, a buff to the encounter because now you have to deal with more of the mechanics quicker into the pull, it feels better to play. So I think Koltharok being buffed in this way is good. And then they nerfed Zav the Unfallen's seismic leap damage, and they made it so there's a grace period when you're getting pulled back into the arena for a short period of time where you have time to actually dodge the frontal, because what was happening in some cases is you would get gripped up from the PvP thing, but it was right when his like leap and or like spell Q was going off, and you would pretty much die right away. So they fixed that, which is good. So overall, Theater of Pain saw some pretty good changes. Now in Darkflame Cleft, I didn't test this one only because this change doesn't really matter in my opinion. So the second boss has a thing called Blazing Storm, and Blazing Storm only happens when there's no one in melee range. Now, there was an issue earlier on PTR where pretty much as soon, like the millisecond you stepped out of melee range, that cast would go off. And they've basically, in a previous patch note, they've changed it so that doesn't happen anymore to some of the mechanics. But they must have missed the Extinguishing Gust, which is an ability that like pushes players away. And so what's happening is if you happen to get clipped by, as a tank, if you got clipped by someone else's like tornado, basically, it would push you out of melee range and then you would just get killed, because the boss would like basically enrage and just nuke your entire party. So supposedly they fixed it. I'm going to take their word for it because it seemed to work on the other mechanics, but it wasn't working on Extinguishing Gust. Now, I didn't experience this personally because the way that you have the room set up is the tank is like on one side and your group is clearing kind of the back 180 of the boss. So it was never an issue, but basically good change, but it was more of a bug fix if anything. Now next we have the 2 big dungeons. Now we saw massive changes in Priory of the Sacred Flame and Operation Floodgate. Now Operation Floodgate was something that I noticed before even reading these notes, because I was in and on stream I was looking at the routes and figuring out what to pull, and I noticed that some mobs were changed, but there was a ton. But before we do Floodgate, let's actually talk about Priory. So what they've done is they've made a couple of trash changes, not too many, but a couple, and they've also significantly reduced the potency of Baron Braunpike, who is the second boss, his spells. So they've removed a Risen Mage and a Devout Priest from the Inner Cathedral, making these pulls much less of a headache. So groups may want to spend a lot of their time clearing the Cathedral, or they might want to actually focus most of their count in here. The removal of a Mage means there's less Fireballs, less Fireball Volleys, and the Devout Priest means there's less Inner Fires and greater heals. That's all it does. It also makes it a little bit easier to group mobs, because what they've done is they've replaced these Mages and Priests with footmen, and footmen are just like guys who melee you, basically. At least I believe that they've been replaced, because all the pulls up there seems to be the same size, but they've removed casters. You then have light spawns. Now these things cast a thing called Purification. This does a ton of damage, but what they've done is they've increased the cast time to 2 seconds, so you can prepare for it, right? So you can see who it's targeting. You can then react with a defensive. It still does the same amount of damage, so it's still a scary ability when it's on you, but now you have more time to react before it actually starts doing its damage. And then you have the light spawn. When it reaches 30% health or 20% health, it basically does something where it starts to erupt, and when it erupts, it heals everything inside of the circle for like 30% or 10% or some percentage based number of all the mobs inside the circle's max health, and it does damage. But basically, they've increased the amount of time you have to move the mobs outside of that circle. This is really easy to do with like things like Ring of Peace, but you can also just walk the mobs out, or you can use like Line of Sight to force them to move without having to kick. So these are both pretty sizable changes, pretty good changes. They've also reduced the amount of Holy Smite damage that's being done by the priests. Holy Smite casts, they weren't like lethal, but if they overlapped with anything, it was quite punishing, and they spam this ability. Like if you kick it, they're going to start casting it again anyways. So them reducing this it doesn't mean you shouldn't kick it, but what it means is it's going to be less punishing if you don't have enough kicks or you overlap or anything like that. And then lastly, the last trash change, they reduced the first mini boss's health by 25%, which is massive because this guy was an absolute tank. What groups were doing on PTR, at least what I was doing on PTR, is you almost had to pull him around to different packs to just constantly be cleaving him down, which can be annoying for the tank because he has a knockback, which is kind of annoying. Anyways, moving on to the boss changes in here, we have Hammer of Purity. This has been reduced by 16%. Really not a big deal. It just means if you get hit by it, at least in a lower key level, it shouldn't one-shot you. In a high enough key, it will. The strategy for this is generally to all be in melee and then dash across the room, and then you'll never get hit by it ever. So this change to me doesn't really mean much. Sacrificial Prior group damage reduced by almost 20%. This is pretty sizable. This means you can like spam soak it as long as your group is healthy. Not a big deal. Most healers in my experience have been able to handle this at least all the way up to like 12s. Obviously we're 678 on PTR, but nonetheless, basically you try to soak 2 very quickly. Your healer will heal you up a little bit, and then you soak the 3rd. When there's 5 on this set, you can go like 2 really fast, and then you stagger 2 more, and then your tank can soak the last one later on in the fight once everyone's healthy. The only problem this happens is with overlaps, but there aren't too many crazy ones. And last but not least, Burning Light. Periodic damage reduced by 80%. Cast time while empowered increased to 2 seconds, was 1.5. Now, realistically, you were kicking this anyways. But if you happen to miss the kick, it's less punishing for pugs. So that's a fine change. I'm all for it. Last but not least, we have Operation Floodgate. Now, there's a lot of changes to this, so I'm going to try to walk through this the best I can. All right, so here we are within the Floodgate, and basically what I want to do is I want to walk through kind of everything that's changed from, I wouldn't say mid PTR, but like late PTR maybe. So I'm on my shaman right now because I just want to like be able to far sight through and kind of show you guys everything that's changed. So there are now contractors here instead of the surveying guys. There are contractors here as well, which replace the winder bots, which are still here and present. But what they've done is they've increased the cooldown of their wind up ability, which is their Bladestorm-esque type ability. So this entire area is very easy to do all in one pull now because contractors don't do anything. You just need a couple of kicks here. And they've nerfed some Shreddinator stuff. So next, if we jump over here, this is kind of where the biggest change is. So this pack used to have a Blood Warper in it, and what they've done is they've gone ahead and they've replaced it with just a soldier. So it's 3 soldiers now instead of 2 soldiers and a Blood Warper, which has made this pull very easy to pull into this pack. So that's pretty good. And then if we go up the stairs here, this Blood Warper pull that you generally have to pull to destroy this box, These used to be the inspectors, which would do like random frontals. They've been replaced with soldiers. So now okay, I shouldn't say very easy, but a much more tame pull, because you don't have to also deal with like really fast-paced hectic movement while healing through the Blood Warper. Now, for those who haven't seen, they've actually removed or moved this box here. It no longer exists down here. There used to be one here. And so what you would do is you would like either skip this pack with Mind Soothe, or you would just pull it and then you would pull this pack. But what they've done is they've moved that up here. So now you have to go up to the top of the stairs to destroy this. But what they've done is they've added soldiers instead of the drones. So these guys are very easy to chain into this pole right here. So that's really a lot of the changes that we're seeing on the, I guess, right side of the map here. They've also reduced the amount of mobs in this pole. There used to be 2 drones. There's now just 1 drone, 1 Blood Warper, and 1 Demolitionist. There we go. Oh my god, words are hard. What they're doing with this is they're trying to force players to utilize this mechanic. Now, this mechanic is you click on this and it spawns a glider. And then you use the glider. Now, they put a target on the map here. So most groups will just fly right across and land on this. Some groups could even maybe experiment with trying to land over in this thing here. It's really, with the trajectory you have here, you're not really going to make it all the way across the other side. So you're going to have to like land in the water and jump up. So that's all the changes they made on this side, which are all really good. So really quick, if we take a look at the notes, they've not only increased the timer, weapon stockpiles now display on the map, they've adjusted where a lot of the mobs were. I thought they had a note in here about, yeah, adjusted some packs near Big Mama to reduce difficulty. So that's everything that I just kind of went over. The big fish downstairs, they've also reduced the damage that he does, so the dot doesn't last as long. The orbs that he spawns that kind of create this a tighter area of combat can either be soaked by the tank now easier or do less damage to people who accidentally walk into it, which are good. They've reduced the AoE damage of the Blood Warpers, which is great. They've reduced the battery discharge of the jump starters by a good bit. The wind-up / Bladestorm ability has now an increased cooldown, so that's now not going to be as dangerous once you can actually stun it. All very good things. They've reduced or increased the cast times. They've reduced the damage. Everything that they've done here are just very, very, very good. They've also changed bosses a little bit by either reducing some of the damage with Gigazap's dot, the turbocharged AoE damage on the fights. They've now, I haven't tested Swamp Face personally, but basically they've made the intermission, not the intermission, but when he does awaken the swamp, the roots that spawn out of the ground that will spawn waves now spawn further away from players. This is generally a good change because there's times where it'll spawn like right underneath you. So as long as they spawn within like further, like about 10 yards away or further, you should be generally pretty good. Overall, really good changes, and I am pretty happy with these. I will say this though, for anyone who has watched my Floodgate video and like how to pull it, the pull structure of that video should remain the same, but you might need to pull a little bit more count in the dungeon, which you can do at the very end or you can do in the start. I'm going to do an updated video probably this week or at the start of next week, just to really hammer home the exact route, because they changed a lot of like the Blood Warpers, for example. If we come back into the dungeon here and I open up MDT, we could just take a look at this. For example, Blood Warpers were worth 2.5%. Soldiers are only worth 0.6%. So this Blood Warper not existing means you're going to need to make up 2.5% elsewhere. Same thing here. The inspectors are worth a little bit over 1%. Soldiers are only worth 0.6, like I just discussed. So them removing these inspectors means that soldiers now, this pull is going to yield less count. This pull going to yield less count. There's going to be some changes to strategy. The general rule of thumb, though, is you need to be going downstairs with 75% count. If you go downstairs with 75% count, you're golden. Use it as like a checkpoint or a checkpoint. What am I saying? Use that as like a benchmark. So if you hit 75% upstairs, you're good to go. Anyways, that's it for the video. A lot of changes. I'm going to be doing a couple of updates here what am I saying? This is why I don't do videos right when I wake up. The rest of my how to pull route videos for the rest of the dungeons will be coming out later this week or this weekend, so keep an eye out for those. And then going into next week, I'm going to be streaming a bunch, and I have another tip video coming, I believe, so keep an eye out for all that stuff. Anyways, I don't know how to end this video, so yeah, bye.